we have 5 movies to talk about this week. 4 that are in theaters, and 1 that came out a little while ago that I just happened to catch. So let's go ahead and start with Angel Has Fallen. The surprisingly successful trilogy that started with Olympus Has Fallen has come to a close, and as far as those two go, I was relatively kind to Olympus Has Fallen when it came out, and I thought it was like really surprisingly sort of like violent and really in your face in a way that action movies kind of seem to not be at that particular time. Like it kind of just looked like it was going to be another Gerard Butler action movie or whatever. But it felt pretty hard hitting as far as that stuff goes. And then London came out 3 years later. And at the time, I wasn't very nice to it, if I remember correctly, and I bashed it for a lot of reasons, but I was able to see it again, and I didn't think it was that bad. And the action is pretty non-stop, which is all you could really ask about that sort of thing. The initial attack scene is kind of, like I said, goes back to that violence that Olympus had, and now we jump ahead another 3 years to this one. And yeah, much like those, it pretty much falls into the same category. All 3 of these movies are kind of just on par with each other. Where they're not particularly great, but they do their job, and they're entertaining enough. So, yeah, it was so they managed to somehow become this surprising trilogy and also keep a sort of consistency in their stories and quality, which is kind of impressive. So, good for Gerard Butler and everybody involved. You would think there'd be tonal shit all over the place because all 3 movies have a different director, and only one of them has, like, kind of a name director, with Antoine Fuqua having done Olympus, but, yeah, they all just kind of fall into the same boat, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. So, we have, the start obviously being, Gerard Butler's basically become, Bruce Wayne by the end of Nolan's trilogy, of course, where all the stuff he's done in the other 2 movies is starting to catch up with him physically. So we get the whole scene where he goes to the doctor and he lies about his job, and they're like, oh yeah, you're like so physically fucked up. Like you whatever you're doing, you probably shouldn't be doing that anymore. And of course he just tells him he's in sales or something, but obviously we know better. And so we go back to his home life, and Radha Mitchell has been jarringly replaced with Piper Perabo. For starters, I had assumed that she had, like, just somehow something had happened to that marriage, despite the fact that it ended so happily at the end of London. But no, she's just recast. It's still the same character. Alright. It's as if that character was crucial enough that this would even stand out, but, you know, there it is. But we do eventually get into another plot, which is a plot that we have seen a million times before, much like the plots we saw in the other 2 movies. But in this particular case, it's really sort of retreaded territory, where it's and Morgan Freeman's the president now. He kind of went up in status as the movies went on, but now he is officially president again. And this time, instead of us getting struck by an asteroid, there's another slightly less problem than the last time he was president. So there is a drone attack, and eventually Freeman ends up in a coma. Everybody thinks Gerard Butler did it, so Gerard Butler has to go on the run. And Morgan Freeman gets to collect his paycheck laying in a bed unconscious. Now, mind you, Freeman does have a little, you know, that sounds like that sort of, you know, just paycheck collecting thing here, but there is something about Freeman's presence. And the sort of back and forth he and Butler have in the scenes where he is conscious, to where it's not just like you can almost completely sort of laugh it off. Like when he is awake, he is doing what he does best. But yes, for the most part, almost as if like a punchline, he does spend most of the movie in a coma. So there is that. But as it goes on, though, obviously there is the whole fraying plot, and we know there's going to be like the usual twists and turns here, where it's like, oh, this guy's a good guy, but oh, maybe he's not. The thing we've been seeing in every movie, starting with Dylan McDermott and just going forward. And in this one, they're all pretty obvious. There was one in particular where my brother said he hadn't seen a trailer and he hadn't seen a TV spot or anything. I just read him the cast list, and he guessed one of the major twists this ended up happening. And there's another, but it is one of those cases, though, where it's like, you can guess something that's going to happen later, like 10 minutes into the movie. Like, it gets to a point where the movie's been on for 5 or 10 minutes, and you're like, oh, well, this. But the interesting thing that the movie does is it takes that really obvious story turn and makes it relatively early. Which I kind of like. Like, the whole thing that direction goes in is like 40 minutes in. Like, half an hour after we can figure it out just by looking at it. So that's kind of to show you that, like, yeah, they know what's going to be obvious. They know what audiences can figure out, but maybe they'll throw in a few other things also just to see if they can throw us off. They probably won't, but I really appreciate that sort of structure, where it's like, oh, you think it's this, and then it's like, it is this, but that might not be all. So, yeah, but like I said, I mean, it's still going to be really obvious anyway to anybody that's seen one action movie in their life, or either one of the other movies in this trilogy. But still, you just kind of forgive that because that's not really... You don't really go to these movies for the surprises, do you? I would certainly hope not. And yeah, it does continue on with, like, that sort of, lack of watered-down violence that this has been going on to, where, as I've been saying, I'm one of those people where I don't need a movie to be R-rated to assume it's going to be quality based on that. But there's something about... There are times where they can make it pay off and sort of make it feel like it's sort of doing something a little different than the action movies we see over and over and over again. Where, yeah, like that, there's like no particular heaviness when you watch like a PG-13 action movie and you just see like bodies drop. You like really get a sense of the heaviness of the death, even when it's a character we've like never seen before or we've barely seen. Where it's like something violent will happen to them and then it'll linger on it, and it gives you like to feel the depth of the scenario that's going on around here, where they're surrounded by the deaths of these people to the point that Gerard Butler and Morgan Freeman are the only survivors of it. There is a sort of feeling there that you wouldn't get in an otherwise sort of watered down movie, so it does have that going for it. To the point that the attack scenes feel like, you know, a real threat. Is there, especially since we know Butler's character's kind of winding down in the physical department with all of this getting to him. So that works fine. But then there is the whole thing where it was kind of like... There is sort of an inevitability to the plot itself, to where it's like... where we have the moments where it always comes down to Gerard Butler pretty much being by himself and protecting like one person. With it being Freeman in this case instead of Aaron Eckhart like it was in the other two. Where it's like, it was only a matter of time before it caught up to him that he was always like the single survivor of these attacks. To where it's like, now they're starting to get suspicious. And it's like, well, he probably caused this. But of course, we know he's being set up by a billion people, really. And then we've got the Jada Pinkett Smith character coming in, where it's like, she's able to be the character that's going after him and doesn't believe that, you know, this is just some setup. And it's like, she's able to be that kind of tough character without us being annoyed by her. Because it'd be very easy to get annoyed by this character because it's like, she's the character that just flat out that goes after him and doesn't believe that this is a setup. But she's kind of no bullshit in the way that she does it, that it kind of just adds another interesting conflict to what's going on with him. So yeah, like I said, it is one of those cases where you can see a lot of the turns coming particularly early, but like I said, with these movies, it's really all about how the action is executed, which isn't perfect by any means. It hasn't been in any of these movies. There's a lot of obvious CGI, and some of it cuts around a bit too much, but there's still... And this character, Mike Banning, that Butler plays, is like a genuine action hero. Like, he is like a really sort of badass hero character that I feel like we don't see to this extent as often as we used to, which is really great. Like, he's a character where he's a good guy that will kill fucking anybody. And we learned that in Olympus Has Fallen, and I thought was one of the great appeals of that movie, and I was talking about how we don't really see that often anymore. So I like that he's able to carry that, and was able to make an entire trilogy out of this character. And yeah, so the action isn't insanely well done, though, but like I said, there is like a consistency, and it to a point that it avoids being boring, which is the main problem with a lot of action movies that have a lot at once in it and kind of stretch throughout. So there is that, and then there's like you know how people say sometimes like in contrast to people that go to more like artful movies or more meaningful movies or more, contemplative movies. There's the other side of the crowd where the people go to the movies just to see stuff blow up, as they say. Well, a lot of shit blows up in this, and quite well. So there's that. And then there's even an exciting climatic showdown. So all the stuff that you would expect in a movie like this is here. And it's done in a way that's just entertaining enough without being too, cheesy or too boring or whatever. I said predictability doesn't necessarily matter. In a movie like this, I wouldn't think, because, like I said, all these action movies sort of hit the same beats. It's just a matter of if they hit those beats well. But they are able to add some other things in here. The addition of the Nick Nolte character, where he's playing Gerard Butler's dad that's been hiding in the woods. Where it's like, I think I saw the comment where it was like, of course they introduced Gerard Butler's dad in this movie. Of course he's a hermit hiding out in the middle of the woods. Of course he's played by Nick Nolte. It was just, we just had to get to that point. And this character is basically if his character in Tropic Thunder wasn't full of shit. Like, if he actually was some, like, badass war veteran that was really great with explosives, then here he would be. And he actually, interestingly enough, has some genuinely heartfelt moments, if you can believe it. Where it's like, you would think, like I was talking about how Freeman, is able to do what he does best in the times where he's conscious in the movie. And Nolte also, you would think, given a part like this, he could probably just sleepwalk through it. Being Nick Nolte, probably literally. But there are actually some genuinely heartfelt moments, particularly one scene he has with Piper Perabo, and it's like, it's interesting how he was able to not back away from that and just phone it in despite knowing the kind of movie that he's in. Like, he actually went for the emotion, and it actually pays off in kind of a nice way, and it gives the movie just a bit more gravity than maybe it needs, but we're happy that it's in there and that it works. So it's got that going for it. It's fine. Like I said, it's pretty much on par with the other two. There may be some stuff that doesn't make sense. That predictability may be in here. The action scenes may not be perfect, but the movie does its job. So that's pretty much all we could ask for it. So, yeah. Next, we can go on to Ready or Not. A movie that I initially wasn't going to rush out to see, but then the reviews started coming in, and it's like, well, maybe I should check this out. And the concept is kind of interesting, even if it's something that we've seen a bunch of times before. And basically what I had gathered before I went in was it was like the last 30 minutes of Get Out by way of the movie You're Next, is basically what I went in thinking was, with, of course, the Most Dangerous Game concept that we've seen a billion times going in. So when it starts, I kind of liked that, because there's obviously we're seeing it through pretty much the perspective of the lead character, who is Samara Weaving, who is married into this creepy family and is going to be hunted by them for some potential thing. I don't know what's saying too much and what isn't, but there's a thing where it's revealed to her what's going on here. Because, of course, she has no idea. She's married into the family. She thinks they own like, this whole sort of board game or card game empire of sorts. And that's basically it. She's just marrying into this rich family, and she's afraid that they're going to think she's doing it just for the money, but she does genuinely love the dude and all that. And then, surprise, you're being hunted by crazy rich people. But the thing about this is that the movie knows that you're going to go in knowing the concept, so they figure, why hide it? So we have the opening scene where we see kind of the character that she's marrying, like, in his youth, and everybody, and then the whole family doing this, and then it's like, oh, they're just telling us right away this is what it is, because we know this is what it is, because we know what the movie's about. That's how we end up in the theater. We know what the movie's about. So the movie doesn't play it up as a surprise that this is what the family does. They just say, here's the intro, this is what it is, and then we cut to the whole marriage thing, which in another movie probably would have been the opening, and then we would have kind of slow burned to get to the whole hunting thing. But no, they just go on with the idea that we know what's happening. So that's good, I guess. And it's even, they give us all the different clues in there, the blatant clues, like, just before they're getting married, he looks her in the eyes deeply and says, I'm giving you an out right now. Like, if you decide you don't want to get married, we can just, right now, we can not. And it's like, yeah, you could see that as the whole, oh, you know, if she's nervous or she thinks maybe she made a rash decision or something, this gives her the. But once again, the movie knows that we know he's saying, this is my best attempt to protect you from this. So it's like, it's not being shy about its concept at all, which in a way, I like that it's not beating around the bush. And then once again, once we get there and see her family, even in the opening credit scene where we're seeing the wedding, and like everything is supposedly perfect, we can see right away how fucking creepy his family looks, how creepy their servants look, and it's like all these different things. The aunt is particularly creepy. All this stuff. So it's almost being like, I guess, cynical about itself, while also giving us the cliche, sarcastic, cynical lead in Weaving's character, where we know she's basically gonna quip her way through this in that black comedy sort of way. And as much as I hate to say this, because usually I would eat this kind of thing up, I've mentioned many times before how much black comedy is one of my favorite genres. Black comedy is also the kind of genre that you can really easily laze through. Because it's like, a lot of black comedies are like, hey, just make people die and then laugh at it. And voila, you have black comedy. But, you know, ditching all the sort of setups and stuff like that and all the different ways you can get to that sort of joke, this one I kind of just felt like, this movie is basically like black comedy 101. Like, if you gave somebody this concept as like a writing prompt and you told them to make it a comedy, just about anybody would come up with the jokes that this movie does about it. It's like the oldest black comedy tropes you can find, and it's like accidental deaths and all that. And I found myself getting pulled out of this quicker and quicker as it went on, and it's like, oh, I see what they're doing here, and it's like, it's trying too hard to be cynical about other movies and their cliches, despite falling into so many black comedy cliches. And it's, yeah, and you can just sense I almost feel like this movie would have had a laugh track in another universe. It was so blatantly obvious the kind of laughs they were going for, like, oh, how do I work this weapon? Oh no, I've accidentally killed somebody. Cue laugh track. And that's basically what the jokes of the movie are. And yeah, like I said, it lost me pretty quickly. And it also is a bit too... There's a way you could sense it. It almost felt a bit up its own ass about it too. The whole cynical thing. Like, there's one particular moment when... once she's figured out what's going on, and she's got this look about her, like, so she, like, takes her shoes off and she puts the other shoes on that don't go with her wedding dress at all, and she, like, rips the wedding dress, and she, like, arms herself, and it's like, she's, like, this sort of comic booky image. And it's like the contrasting things where it's like the shoes and the weapons, but the wedding dress also, but the tearing and all that, it makes her look almost warrior-like, but she's still in her wedding dress. It's like, yeah, I get it. But then there's an actual moment where she walks by a mirror and acknowledges this. And it's unclear whether she looks at herself in that getup and she's just like, Jesus. And it's like, either she's saying, oh my god, I'm a total badass, or oh my god, what have I become? But either way, it's like basically the movie acknowledging itself. It's like it's literally the equivalent of the movie itself walking by a mirror and admiring itself. And that just left a bad taste in my mouth, and this sort of self-congratulatory thing. And like I was saying, that's what the whole movie sort of feels like. And I just wasn't into it. Every now and then there's something like, I thought the Adam Brody character had some interesting sort of directions that he went. And he was a bit of an unpredictable character. And then there's going on unpredictability also. I like that there's sort of the overall hovering question of that the whole family thinks there's going to be a consequence if they don't do this. Like a consequence for the whole family, like a sort of almost supernatural sort of thing. But the whole question throughout the movie is that real or not? Like, if they don't kill her, is there going to be some consequence, or will nothing happen? And no character knows the answer to that, and they, like, sort of debate about it as the movie goes on. There's something interesting there, but it's mostly focused on the same old bullshit. There's another one that's sort of darkly funny, a joke that I liked, where it's, one of the guys is given, like, an ancient sort of crossbow that he has no idea how to use, and at one point throughout the movie, we catch him, locked up in the bathroom watching a tutorial on YouTube of how to use a crossbow, which is a funny joke also, but for the most part, it all just feels really blatantly obvious. And like I said, you lay down the concept, you can guess every comedic bit in this movie, and all the directions it's going to go. There are some people that kind of really sort of play with the tone, like, the guy playing the dad is, like, really over the top, like, and the fact that he knows the exact movie he's in without necessarily going to the same tropes as the rest of the cast is having to do with their little quips and one-liners and stuff like that. Just the way he, like, really went for it. I really liked. And then there's the stuff, like the stuff you can imagine being in this movie, but it's just, like, this kind of stuff is done so much better. One thing that came to mind was, bits like the scene in Us, where it's like halfway through the movie, and then the family just sort of stops to compare their kill counts, and which is one of the scenes I really loved in Us, and it's like, it's the similar kind of humor in this movie, but it just doesn't, it just feels, this whole movie feels way too try-hard, is what it feels like. So yeah, and then all in all, it just ends up falling on the same two jokes, which is the whole culmination of the movie, which is, oh, fucking rich people, they're so crazy and so out of touch, and, like, this is the kind of thing they do because they're rich and crazy. And then there's also the what's basically ends up being the last moment of the movie, where we realize the whole joke also is fucking in-laws. And it's like, oh, in-laws, am I right? What can you do? And it's like, that's about as ancient as, like, the stand-up comics from the 50s that would say, oh, my wife is the worst. What's the difference between that and an, oh, in-laws joke? Not much. They're all kind of dated in the same way. So, yeah. There's a lot of potential in this one, and I like that they just sort of wanted to really go for it, but I just wasn't into it, and I felt like I could just sort of see through its bullshit, but I can also see where people are still into the whole cynical, turning horror tropes on its head or whatever the fuck, which would explain the movie's good reviews, but just personally, I wasn't into it really at all, when I really should have been, because it's really usually my thing, but not this way, not when it's so blatantly obvious about itself, so, yeah. So let's go on to another surprisingly critically acclaimed movie with Good Boys. Was anybody else expecting this to be as critically acclaimed as it was? I sure as shit wasn't. And I was obviously dismissing it as, oh, it's that movie where Jacob Tremblay says fuck, and that's the punchline. It's little 12-year-olds saying fuck a lot and doing sort of raunchy things like looking up porn and shit. Yeah, it's got some more funny things in there. Obviously, there's the inevitable comparisons to Superbad. It is one of those cases where it's like, we start at Superbad with high schoolers, then we go into 12-year-olds, and it's like, is Seth Rogen's next movie going to be raunchy babies, or are they going to go the other direction, or what? But yeah, and sure enough, in the first scene, a couple of things, there were a couple of red flags, just at the start. Where I went into it saying, oh, they're gonna make the joke, hey, Jacob Tremblay's saying fuck, remember the cute little kid from Room that did all the, talk shows and shit, and did Wonder, and it's like, he's saying fuck now, which, if you watch The Twilight Zone, he's already done anyway, but this movie was really gonna capitalize on that. And sure enough, the very first line of the movie is him on his laptop, adjusting the tits on his video game character, and Jacob Tremblay's first line is, fuck yeah. So it's like, yep, this is definitely the Jacob Tremblay Says Fuck movie I thought it was. But then, on top of that, we have his dad, Will Forte, walking in just as he's about to jerk off to said video game character. And we realize, oh, Will Forte's here. Great. Except for the fact that he's just here to do the Eugene Levy and American Pie thing. Exactly. the whole being a little too blunt about talking about sex with the young kid and all that, and it's like, hey man, it's perfectly normal, you do your thing, and it's like, yeah, we saw all this. This is the opening to American Pie. So what else are you gonna do? But then as it went on, it became clear that if the script wasn't going to be up to par and the jokes were going to be hit and miss, regardless, the cast was going to make it work. The three boys are really, really good, especially really good together, in making these lines and these moments land in a way that, with a less talented cast, would have just been the same, seemed like the same old shit. But they can really make it work. And another thing that they really make work also, that I kind of wasn't expecting about the movie, and this is where I think the movie sort of works the best, because you go into it and you see like the posters where it's like good boys and there's like the combination of a halo and horns, and they're really cashing in on the R-rated thing, and it's like, oh, just they're doing the sausage party thing where it's like, hey, this looks like a kids movie, but it's totally not, and that's basically our whole fucking joke that we're gonna stretch out to an hour and a half. But the interesting thing about that is the movie isn't necessarily what it looks like as far as being about them being like bad kids and doing bad things. The whole joke is that they're actually pretty innocent kids, and they're pretty much the good boys of the title at heart. They're just trying to be bad and failing miserably. And that's a really charming setup and a concept, and it's like, okay. And it helps a lot that the three of them are like so likable. Because when you look at a concept like this, you would think the idea would be that, like I said, they're just bad kids, and it's like, why would we ever have reason to like them when they just want to, do whatever it is they're doing? But that's the thing, is they're really likable kids that just sort of find their way into these situations as opposed to putting themselves in them. Or they do put themselves in them, just really inadvertently. Because the whole thing, you think about the fact that the way they combine the innocence with the raunchiness, how the innocence is what sets off the raunchiness, is just sort of a cause and effect thing, because the whole thing comes about because he accidentally crashes Will Forte's expensive drone. And it's like, so they have to go through all the stuff to get it back, which involves, like, finding a bottle of Molly and trying to steal beer and doing all this other stuff. When the reason they took the drone to begin with was they wanted to learn from the next door neighbors how to kiss properly for a kissing party. And it's like, so the innocence of it is what gave way to that. And they play up that innocence also, where it's like, when they go to school and there's the competition of who can drink the most beer. But the competition of who can drink the most beer the record is 3 sips. And it's like, setups like this are like, okay. The only problem I have with that, though, is that I was trying to figure it out, because nobody else seemed to have a problem with this when I looked around. So maybe I just had a weird childhood, but I almost felt like 12 was way too old for the way that the characters act, and the things that they are apparently not already exposed to, because it's like, with their naivete and like the questions they have and like their reactions to certain things, it almost felt more like 8 or 9-year-olds as opposed to 12-year-olds. Like I said, maybe I was just exposed to too much by the time I got to 12, that sort of seemed like the ages were maybe a bit off in regards to how far their naivete went. But I don't know. So, but yeah, that's the thing, though, that's the appealing thing, is it's like, the whole sort of bad thing, when they're like, dancing in the bathroom, talking about how bad they're going to be, the whole bad thing is really just a facade. And it's like, there really is just sort of the innocence underneath this. Which made it feel less like the movie was like trying super extra hard to be raunchy. So that really helped a lot in regards to that, because that's the kind of stuff that makes the raunchiness get old really fast. And it still does eventually, like it barely gets halfway through and we're done with the whole raunchiness factor. It's like, yeah, we get the jokes now. We did when we saw the poster. I mean, halfway through the movie, we're going to be done with the raunchy stuff. And it's like, okay, do you have any other jokes? And every now and then they throw in something like, the whole Stephen Merchant thing is really funny, and the way they sort of bring him back briefly. Lines like when they're having to cross the highway, stuff like that. Like I said, stuff where you don't necessarily need the raunch, but still somehow finds its way in anyway. where it's like when he gets to the middle of the road and he doesn't want to cross anymore, and he's like, "No, it's okay, I'll just live here." And it's like, yeah, so because you're not used to watching a Seth Rogen movie and there being different kinds of jokes. It's usually weed and shit, and that's it, and saying fuck a lot. What Sausage Party was, despite the fact that I'm a defender of Sausage Party, that's all Sausage Party was. But the thing is that this does have just a little more up its sleeve, but even so, it does end up falling into those categories eventually. Like I said, the whole sort of, American Pie feel, there is the whole thing where, of course, even though the whole point, the whole, uniqueness of the movie is that it's the raunchy teen comedy we know of, except they're 12-year-olds. But of course, they're still going to end up at a frat house anyway. Which does end up being a more or less funny scene, but it's like, it still kind of felt like a cop-out, where it's like, it was like them sort of going back to the whole, like, Neighbors feel. It's like they just couldn't resist. Like, they can't step out of their comfort zone too much. They have to keep coming back to it. So, yeah, but for the most part, there are jokes in there that I like the idea of, but I don't know about the execution. Like this is another one where I'm not quite sure if the age completely matches up with the joke. Whereas the whole thing where they start fighting and the conflict is going to happen, but in any other movie, it's like, oh, they get mad, they yell at each other, they go their separate ways. But because they're very young children, when they start fighting, they just start crying, and it's like it's almost kind of uncomfortable, because it's like, because they're so likable and you grow to like them so much, you get the punchline of them crying because they're children, and that's not the way this conflict usually goes. But it's still like this weird sort of thing where, like, there's a scene towards the end where there's a punchline to something that happens to Jacob Tremblay, and his response is to just sit in the park and weep. And it's like, I didn't want to laugh because I felt bad for him. But it's I think it's because the crying is so authentic, which in a way you can say adds to the comedy of it, but I think it also kind of killed the joke a little more for me, because it's like, Jacob Tremblay's such an authentic crier that it's like, I felt like it needed to be more over the top to get the comedic point across. Like, it needed to be James Franco in Pineapple Express sitting on a swing crying into a sandwich, is what it needed to be. And the authenticity of it just felt wrong. So, and I get, making the audience say that feels wrong is a lot of what people that make these movies are going for, but not in that way. It just felt it in a bad way. So maybe that's just me, though. Maybe I'm being too empathetic to the whole situation. But yeah, but I do get the punchline that's in there, and I do appreciate that. And it's like they were trying to juggle the punchline of, oh, they're kids, they're gonna cry, but with sort of there's still genuine emotion, because the movie, almost ironically, really does have like a mature conclusion. Like, they do end up in like a really mature place. And there is a nice joke also about how much time passes when, like, it's not as much as it seems. But, yeah, so there is something in there. But once again, though, pretty much echoes the ending of Superbad and the conclusion that came to also. But, yeah, it's still fun. It's a lot better and funnier than I assumed it would be. Especially given that concept, just like, much like Ready or Not, you just see the concept and you're like, well, I know this movie just by looking at it. But yeah, this one kind of, shakes it up enough. And like I said, the likable cast just really takes it above and beyond to what it could have been, and really, really makes a difference. So, yeah, so it's fine. Also, that's gonna be, I don't have particularly strong opinions this week, apparently. And that's going to kind of continue with 47 Meters Down, Uncaged. Because we were all clamoring for a sequel to 47 Meters Down a mere 2 years later. From the same director and the same writers. And you get a sense they're kind of trying to use their cast to get a little bit of attention drawn to them. Because we had, like, Mandy Moore in the last one. Now, in this one, it's not as direct. There's 4 girls. One of them, the main one, is the girl from The Book Thief, I think. And 2 of her other friends are Corinne Fox and Sistine Stallone. And if those names sound familiar, yes, the daughters of Jamie Foxx and Sylvester Stallone. So basically, they wanted to get Jamie Foxx and Sylvester Stallone on the red carpet to make the movie look like it was worth a shit. But I don't know, and I don't think audiences were having it either. Side anecdote, real quick. When I went to see Scary Stories, I believe the trailer for this was on it. And the way that went down was, like I said, I don't look at the trailers, but I hear them, and I can usually identify what the movies are. And so there was some sort of generic horror movie that went by, and the theater was packed, and like nobody really reacted. And then an It 2 trailer came on, and then when the It 2 trailer ended, everybody was like, murmuring and saying, yes, definitely, opening day, definitely, that looks fucking terrifying, yes, totally. And then a 47 Meters Down trailer came on, and the trailer ended. And then everybody was silent, and in that silence, the guy behind me just went, no. So, I'd like to think that sums up how people felt about this movie existing at all. So, yeah, I liked the fact of the first movie was better than I thought it was going to be, and the idea of them being trapped in the cage felt very much like open water from the other side of the water. And of course, I'm a big fan of open water, so I like that sort of, making some big sort of blockbuster shark movie, but having the sort of, balls to make it like a single location of sorts. And kind of making it contained. But of course, the title says they're just going to abandon that. So, and to their credit, they tell us right up front. And so they're going to have them swim around in the dark and call out each other's names for an hour and a half as they get eaten by one. So, yeah. And we've doubled we've kind of tripled the amount of characters, because we've got 4 girls, but then we've got 3 extra people as well. We've got the main girl's dad, and Corinne Fox's stepdad is John Corbett. And the mother is Nia Long, who's in this for like 20 seconds. Just to say, hey, I'm here, and then never come back. And John Corbett's got his little buddies that work for him, and they're all sort of underwater at once. And this all starts because it's sort of a bonding experience for the two of them, because they're step-siblings. But there's a lot of shakiness here, and you can tell it's just mindless bullshit to make it look like these characters have backstory, and to make it look like they've got something to make us care about them, but they really don't. It's all just sort of, window dressing, because you've got the whole thing where she's being bullied by like a Regina George type, the main girl, and then after this, Corinne Fox is like sort of, embarrassed by her. She's like, she's not my sister. No, don't associate me with her. And then we get a sense of that's what their relationship is, right? Well, the very next scene puts an end to this whole subplot. And what is the Regina George type's comeuppance? They tell the main girl, hey, we're gonna go swimming. We're gonna go into, like, underwater caves and shit. Why don't you come with us? And just like that, they go from not my sister, and she even says it too to Nia Long. She's like, she's not my sister. They're just best friends now. Just a scene later, just because. And the comeuppance of the Regina George type is they flip her off as they drive off. We never see that girl again. And the whole opening scene is her, like, shoving her into a pool and, like, bullying her and humiliating her in front of everybody. But let's flip her off as we drive away. The end of that whole plot. So the rest of it now is them doing the whole underwater thing, and eventually they're going to get eaten by sharks. So this movie has one fucking trick up its sleeve, and you can probably guess what it is. Remember the scene we all know and love in Deep Blue Sea? When Samuel L. Jackson's giving us the big speech, and he's like, we gotta stick together, we gotta do all this, we gotta fight the fucking sharks, whatever it is he says, and then he just gets eaten just like that, and it just pops out of nowhere and just takes him. That's the card this movie plays every time a shark appears. As if it's a new thing, and this movie's gonna be some tense thing where it's like, oh, I wonder what's gonna happen. Oh, is this gonna be, But you can sense it right away, even when they're surprising you. The first attack, right away, just completely and totally lays itself out like a fucking blueprint. Because they're doing the whole thing, they're swimming through. And to their credit, the whole idea to be able to swim around instead of being stuck in a cage, every now and then they have an interesting location. Like, it's this whole sort of Mayan temple thing. You've got, like, you know, the mummified body still there, like a catacombs thing. And every now and then they kind of give us a cool visual like that. Um, but like I said, for the most part, it's them swimming around in the dark, screaming each other's names over and over again. So after they've done that a few times, after they see the shark for the first time, and they freak out and they panic and they swim around, they split up, they find their way back together. There's never a point. They always split up, but then they always find their way back together. There's no fucking consequence to that. But anyway, one of the guys John Corbett works with, they work for him, swims up and is like, "Hey guys, what's going on?" And then he just kind of floats there next to them, and everything he says is so hollow and meaningless. Where everything's silent around him, he's like, "Hey guys, yeah, so you were just doing that, and oh, you were doing that," and just, he is babbling nothing, because we know what he's saying has nothing to do with anything. We are killing time so that we can cut him off mid-sentence with a shark attack. And it's like, you can just sense, it's like, these sentences he's saying were written strictly to be cut off in the middle. And it's like, it is just so laid out. There is no surprise factor whatsoever. And the fact that they pull this shit multiple times is not doing it any favors. Obviously only making it worse. So, yes. And then, like I said, between moments of people getting eaten by sharks, it's just heavy breathing over a pretty much black screen. Screaming each other's names over and over again. There's one thing about these movies, you will never forget the character names. So you got that going for it. Like the fucking guy in Paranormal Activity. Nobody's ever gonna forget his fucking name. So, on that, yeah. So here's the thing, though, is that I sort of feel like you want to give them credit for the whole thing of moving around, seeing locations, stuff like that. It really does feel like this whole concept is, like, better suited for the whole limited movement thing and limited location thing. Because it almost, that's really where the suspense comes from with that. With this whole thing of moving around in the dark until sharks predictably pop up, it's not doing anything. But there's also a problem I think I have, and this may just be like a personal thing, but I think that just in general, shark movies to me aren't particularly that interesting or fun or anything like that. Like, they had that 3D Shark Night movie from like 2011. There's all the fucking straight made-for-TV bullshit that I never cared about. You know, the Jaws sequels. Like, obviously Spielberg set this whole thing off and showed with his whole different techniques how you can do the whole shark scenario greatly. And movies have been able to pull it off that one time. I sort of had fun with The Meg, but you can just still see the whole, them kind of trying to cash in on the whole, what this, like, the Sci-Fi Channel bullshit with sharks is. And all of it is just, like, sort of really boring to me, for the most part. And like I said, the more over-the-top those straight-to-DVD movies or those made-for-TV movies try to be, the more fucking boring and predictable they get, and the more obvious, and it's just fucking, just none of that works, and it's all just, you know, swimming, sharks appear, somebody gets eaten, repeat, over and over again. This movie manages to take a break every now and then for some very, very laughable slow-mo, in their big dramatic moments, but it's only, like everything else, it's just making the movie worse. So that's, yeah, I guess shark movies just aren't for me, unless they're the first Jaws. So, like I said, even the sequels to Jaws warned us, really, that you just, yeah, I just don't care for this shit, really, at all. So, that's where I stand with that, without getting too repetitive, which is probably too late. So let's end on The Haunting of Sharon Tate, which came out, I think, close to the beginning of the year, but I just happened to catch it on DVD recently. This is one of the many movies that came out. There's obviously, ever since Manson died, there's been like a whole barrage of movies with him. There's also, I'll probably talk about Matt Smith's movie Charlie Says at some point soon also. But this is one of the many cases where Sharon Tate's sister very much disapproved of it, saying it's glorifying everything, it's taking advantage of it, it's glorifying as much as they can and relishing in that for seemingly no reason. You know, all the reasons all the opposite reasons she approved of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And then obviously with the whole setup, it's like they're almost trying to bring like a supernatural thing into the murder of Sharon Tate. It's that kind of movie. So Hilary Duff is playing Sharon Tate, which most people will probably giggle at because it's like Hilary Duff thinks she's a serious actress. But it is one of those cases where it's like it's hard to fault her for taking the opportunity to play Sharon Tate. Seems like would be a big deal to probably anybody. It is on her to have read the script and still said yes, but I mean, once again, the opportunity is probably pretty irresistible to an actress in that area. And then we've also got Jonathan Bennett, I think is his name, who was Aaron Samuels in Mean Girls. So, yeah. He's suddenly returned from wherever the hell he was. Who is playing a very chiseled, modeled-like Jay Sebring. So, once again, it's just that kind of movie. And they're doing their school play level acting with all their convoluted intros. They're playing it up like a very cliche horror movie. There's the whole thing where when they get back, Abigail Folger is throwing a surprise party for her to say, hey, you know, me and Wojtek are here and we're going to be hanging out. But the way they introduce this is to set up a surprise party. It's Sharon and Jay outside the house. The camera's inside the house looking out the window. And a sinister sound plays as a shadow walks by the window. And they're dating the scenes, by the way. So we know this is not in any way going to be that. There's many things that tell us this is not going to be her murder right away. So why are we doing the horror movie build-up? I feel like this is for people who have like never done their research whatsoever, will find some interest in this movie for some reason, and assume this is the things that happened in real life. So after we do the whole lurking window thing, they do another thing where they whip out this board game, which isn't quite a Ouija board, but it seems to be something akin to that, where it's like it answers questions and shit. So we get really sensitive scenes, like Sharon saying, will I live a long and happy life? And the thing says no. And then Charlie comes to the door looking for fucking Terry Melcher. So yes, this is where we land here. And talking about the whole sort of horror approach they're trying to take to this. This is a guy who is clearly... this writer-director is clearly a guy that's obsessed with horror movies. Because he made like those... He made like a Scream documentary and like a Nightmare on Elm Street documentary and a Friday the 13th documentary, I think. And now he seems to be wanting to turn this movie into a Nightmare on Elm Street. It's like sort of like, this is like what would happen if Billy Loomis had become a director instead of a serial killer. Which is the review I left on Letterboxd, by the way. But the thing about this is that, okay, so here it starts with an Edgar Allan Poe quote, which is something a Nightmare on Elm Street movie once did. His production company is called 1428 Films. We have the whole scene where it's she's lying awake and hearing the two of them fucking in the other room, much like Glenn in A Nightmare on Elm Street. It's like, why the fuck is he trying? And then the whole thing stems from her having a dream of being murdered, and then it comes true eventually. It's like, why the hell did he go full Nightmare on Elm Street with the fucking Sharon Tate story? There's so many fucking problems with this. And he took that thing where apparently Sharon Tate said once in one interview that she had one dream, that she was knifed by a guy and was like tied up with Jay Sebring. And this movie turns it into her having multiple premonitions of her murder, basically so they can recreate the murder scenes over and over again and make them as bloody and disturbing and violent as possible, because what's the point of that exactly? Yeah, like, in so many different ways, too, because we've seen this translated to screen so many different times. There's 2 Helter Skelter movies alone, on top of all the other ways they recreated this. There was that thing that I heard something about American Horror Story doing this, sort of shoehorning it into something they did. And like, after a while, you do have to wonder what the point is, if it's not just fucking fetishizing it. Because that seems to be what this movie's doing, where it's like, whenever we see, like, the Manson family members, there's, like, that sort of, you know, speaker straining horror music that plays every time they walk by, or we see them from a distance or something. There's the whole story where, to my understanding, Dr. Saurstein, their dog, was, like, accidentally killed by Wojtek, I think, in some sort, like, he accidentally ran him over or something. Well, this movie does have the death of the dog, but in this case, we're to assume that the Manson family people killed him on a hill and, like, mutilated him, and we get those flashy cuts of it where Sharon comes across his body, and it's like we get the carnage of the dog's mutilated body from all the different angles, while, like, the horror music's playing really loudly. And it's like, you know that stuff that, like, all straight-to-DVD directors think, like, makes something intense, when all it does is scream amateur hour. So that's what a lot of this is also. There's also a moment where she has a hallucination that there's a dead animal covered in maggots in her refrigerator. And it's like, what the fuck is this shit? Apart from you just sort of jerking off to your love for horror movies, you're just taking in this innocent person that was brutally murdered and putting it in with it. Because what they've done here is, like I said, they take the concept of her supposedly having this one dream, and then they turn it into making her a paranoid basket case that, like, hates her friends. Like, there's the whole thing where she thinks that, like, all the weird shit that's making her paranoid is, like Abigail Folger and Wojtek are, like, making that happen somehow. Like, they're conspiring against her to drive her crazy for some reason, and she hates that they're here. She hates that they're in her house. And we get the whole stale imagery of she starts running water, and the water turns to blood in the faucet. And it's, what is this? So, and then, of course, we go a bunch of different directions, like, and they're trying to play up that they did it, like, when they're talking about the fact that Polanski went off to make Day of the Dolphin, and it's like, they mention Day of the Dolphin by name, and then it's like, he said, Jay at one point said, they're just in the middle of a conversation, they're just talking, and then out of nowhere, unrelated, oh, hey, don't forget, we're gonna go have dinner at El Coyote tomorrow, you know, because that's what you did before we died. And it's like, instead of adding details to say, like, oh, this is what really happened, and oh, we know it's getting closer, it's just like it's them screaming, hey, guys, we did research, we read a couple of Wikipedia articles, and then we wrote this movie. And it's fucking obvious and stale. And like I was talking about, where it's like, it goes that whole route where, like, everybody's, like, chiseled and right out of the gym, where it's like, there's a point in time where, like, Jay and Wojtek are, like, really scantily clad around the pool, and then I swear to God, somebody that ends up becoming a major character in this movie is Steve Parent. The guy that was visiting, like, the groundskeeper and then got killed on his way out, just as Tex and them were coming in. He becomes a major character now, and somebody that Sharon gets to know, like, really well, and they practically become best buddies, and he's trying to help her figure out how Charlie's music is, like, supernaturally starting itself in her attic, or whatever the hell. And sure enough, even dorky old Steve Parent, not to disrespect the dead, whips off his shirt, chiseled physique. It's like a fucking parody. And it's really ridiculous. And I was talking about also, it's like, but that's the thing though, is it's like it's going for a certain target audience. It's like, teen girls are going to eat this movie up as they would eat up any other horror movie. Is what that kind of thing screams to me. So that's what that problem is. And then it's like, yeah, and then of course with Steve Parent becoming a major character, you realize, yep, somebody thought they were going to get ahead, you know, get ahead of the game as far as changing history in the Sharon Tate murder. It's like, oh, I hear Tarantino's doing that. Well, we know he's going to change history. I'll bet I can beat him to it, and I'll bet I can do it even better than he will. And it's like, remember when we were talking about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and we were like, well, if Tarantino's going to change history, we probably have an idea. It's probably going to be a sort of bastards like, you know, posthumous revenge sort of thing. But it's like, but that would be way too obvious, maybe pretty tasteless. So he did something totally different. Like I said, took Sharon out of the equation entirely before going on his climax. Well, just as we were applauding Once Upon a Time in Hollywood for not doing that, this movie is like, well, I'm gonna do it, and I'm gonna do it real hardcore, and it's fucking embarrassing. And so, yeah, and like I said, it was really just seemed like it was an excuse to do the whole recreating the murders and all their bloody, horrific detail, and like while simultaneously falling into just random horror cliches. Like, obviously, the whole thing where somehow she's getting all paranoid. Obviously, we have the cliche where she thinks this thing's going to happen and nobody believes her. And it's like, no, you don't understand. This thing's going to happen. And they're like, oh, she's going crazy. We should medicate her or something. And I was trying to find any silver lining as to, like, in any way of them treating this with respect in any way whatsoever. The only thing I can find is there's one nice moment, very briefly, that shows, like, the love she had for Polanski. Where she's, like, there's a moment where she's, like, in that room, and there's a Fearless Vampire Killers poster on the wall, the movie they made together, like, he directed and they starred in, which is an amazing movie. And she just kind of looks at the poster lovingly, as if, like, you know, like, that's our thing. And it's, like, just sort of a loving thing towards that. Like, this is the father of my child, and this is, you know, the different things we made together and all that. But, no. Everything else I mentioned is what this movie is. And if you think this is as bad as it's gonna get, I looked this guy up. And I don't know if anybody else has looked it up, but this guy's next movie, you would think, oh, okay, and he got terrible feedback for this, so maybe he'll learn his lesson and not do shit like this and leave shit alone. Nope. The guy's next movie is The Haunting of Nicole Brown Simpson. So I think that's where we should leave this before I fucking vomit. So next week, as I said, I will be seeing The Farewell, Them That Follow. Maybe I'll see what Charlie Says is all about. There was Casey Affleck's movie that went to VOD that I meant to check out like 2 weeks ago. I'll probably try to get to that also. And then obviously I'm doing a Versus shortly after this again. And once again, we're still just kind of killing time until it comes out on the 6th. So, and then before that, I'll be doing a sort of it-themed video also. A couple of it-themed videos also, is the plan anyway. So until we get to It Week, this is what we're looking at. So until whatever the next thing is, that's it for this.